Good evening, everybody. When I was asked to come and speak about the role of risk management in enabling strategic performance, I was just asking why me at this particular time, because there's a lot of skepticism around risk management, because everybody's wondering if risk management was working. You know, whatever happened over the last 18 months, attitudes are changing globally and indeed in South Africa. There's nowhere that I go that people don't mention risk management. A lot of companies have realized, if you look at the last crisis, was the interdependencies that exist between organizations. Risk happening in one part of the organization quickly cascades and hits another one. Obviously, risk committees, again, which is a common structure in South Africa, again, is becoming quite a phenomenon. When it comes to strategic risks and operational risks, people shy away from that, and the board has previously not requested for independent assurance on that area. And because of that, they are now demanding that risk managers have that skill that can address that area. What has happened over the last few months as enterprise risk management has developed is there have been a myriad of risk functions. So what we found, for example, there is 73% of the companies we surveyed had 7 or more separate risk functions, and that is excluding external audit. If you look at the risks that we are saying, or the questions that the board should be asking about risk, there are 3 things. One is, are we taking the right risks? And then the second thing they should be asking is, are we taking the right amount of risk in terms of costs? And then finally, which is the last column there, is, are we adequately managing our risks? This diagram here represents what we see in a lot of companies. So for example, here, in a lot of companies we deal with, the risk and control functions, as we said, there are many. They are independent, some of them are misaligned, and they're fragmented. And you can see that's reflected in those multiple lines of communication. And the 4 things that must work therefore, once these groups work together and that guide them, is firstly, they must have an aligned mandate and scope. Secondly, it has to be a coordinated infrastructure and people. Thirdly is around consistent methods and practices. And then just finally, a common information and technology process or platform. I think the message here is the times are now shorter. There's a lot of pressure in our businesses. The world is so dynamic. It's so interconnected. We need to have a process where we can detect things faster and react faster. Time is of the essence. No 2 people share the same view around risks. And it is for 2 reasons. One, there's no consensus around the vertical silos that you saw. So the HR manager and the finance manager have a completely different view around risk. We also talked about horizontal layers, and that now refers to the board, the CEO, CFO, a perspective and time scale of an executive is so different from someone at the bottom. So in order to make it effective, what we're saying is we need to find a common language that links those and cascades the language of risk so that it's relevant, but at the same time that the organization at all levels understands what really matters. I think we need to trust solid organizational procedures over individual instincts. So if we are to be serious around risk management, we have to position it where it matters, which is at the board level, but it also has to mean something for us, which is in our pocket. So it says designing risk management without defining your appetite is like designing a bridge without knowing which river it needs to span. So again, it's just reminders, taking us back to common sense, that know what the lay of the land is, put in your strategy, look at your risks, and know when it is time to quit. The board is responsible for defining the risk appetite and risk tolerance of the organization, and management is there to execute it. And the reason why it's there is because it's the board that sets the strategy for the business. So in doing that, they need to be aware, they need to measure, and they need to be informed around what those risks are. It's about finding the right balance. It's about knowing what your risks are, what you're prepared to pay for them, and what value it means for your organization.
So the question Celestine started with, which was, where was risk management during this crisis? And was the lack of risk management something that contributed to the crisis? Is certainly on the minds of many of the leading corporations. So the point is, we're not going to get the warning that there's a problem coming and get ready and brace yourselves because the problem is going to hit you in 12 months' time. The problem is going to hit you quickly. So Celestine's point about risk management needing to be at the top of its game all the time is especially important. Some of the key findings. Cost reduction was very clearly at the top of the corporate agenda, with 2/3 of the companies surveyed saying they were very active, they had programs on the go, and they were highly focused on managing their costs. Just over half, or 55% of those companies, talked about their cost reduction programs focusing on both overhead costs as well as your direct costs, or your cost of goods sold. Securing economic survival, a point that was cited as the primary reason for embarking on the cost reduction programs in the last year. So it's no surprise that many organizations cited the need to just secure their survival, just to be around when this storm had passed. Despite the slowdown, there were a few sectors that looked as though they were somewhat recession-proof. When you aren't able to sustain your cost efficiency, then you are exposing the organization to significant risk when the kind of downturns that we've experienced in the last 18 months, when they return, and they will return. We asked the question, what are some of those key factors that would make your cost reduction program and have made and led to success in cost reduction programs? There was some fairly strong consensus on what came through. Clear ownership and accountability of the cost reduction program. There needs to be the right team. Having people with a good understanding of the business and where the excess cost may lie is critical. Having a clear business case, because cost reduction is uncomfortable. It is not easy. Often there are jobs and careers that get impacted through cost reduction programs. So having a strong business case, also because sometimes you need to spend some money to save more money. And if the business case is not thorough and well-defined, well, there's the risk that you will spend the money and actually not save anything. So you may end up being worse off. If you operate in a business that makes billions in profits, how do you suddenly become geared up to behave in a more cost-conscious way? Over the years, a picture that we have put together around our global practices is you can get a wide range of savings depending on what types of initiatives you embark on. The thought is that as organizations and as managers and executives in organizations, we have to make our businesses more recession-proof. And one of the ways we need to do that is by what we're calling growing lean. Yes, when you grow and when the recovery comes and the focus shifts to market share and growth, that's great. But don't do so with complete reckless abandon. Do so with the need to continue watching your costs so that your cost to income ratio doesn't go out of kilt. You will grow your costs, but you don't grow your costs faster than you're growing your revenues. That's the thought. The question is, how many of our organizations are going to withstand, and how well will they withstand, another sharp economic slowdown if we don't embed some of these good practices into the way we run our businesses?